to be their voice, Republican or Democrat. Scoop Jackson, Ronald Reagan, Tom Lantos, Henry Hyde. Political leaders of every stripe in this nation have stood with the oppressed, the persecuted, and the downtrodden. Unfortunately, I think this is no longer the case. In the face of a dramatic rise in religious freedom violations globally, the administration's anemic response has been indefensible. The vital post of Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, the senior government official charged with speaking out for those who are facing religious freedom violations globally, had been vacant for well over half the last 6 years. This during an era of soaring abuses against men and women of every faith. And when it was filled earlier in the administration, the position was so marginalized within the State Department apparatus so as to make it really questionable. Consider, for example, that in 2012, the Washington Post reported that the Chinese officials denied a visa to the religious freedom ambassador and, quote, refused to meet her to discuss issues of religious freedom just days before the scheduled visit to Washington by China's vice president. This diplomatic outrage did not even muster an official State Department response. Now the good news is, and I don't know if David is still here, but Rabbi David Saperstein has now been appointed as the ambassador. David was there at the beginning of it, the founding meeting when we had a meeting in Mayflower. David was a commissioner, and now will fill the role of the ambassadors, and I am very confident that David will do an outstanding job. But meanwhile, in the past, the same year the State Department stopped including religious freedom in its annual human rights report, senior officials rarely raised religious freedom issues in cases publicly. And the Secretary of State in those days neglected to utilize even the most fundamental diplomatic tool at her disposal to advance this fundamental right, namely the annual designation of countries of particular concern as required by law. The administration to date has not taken religious freedom seriously. I know, and I shouldn't get David in trouble, but David will make sure they take it seriously. And if they don't take it seriously, I believe he will not be the type of person who will go out and write a book about it later on, but will speak at the time that he is in that spot. It is important that America's credibility, which could be at an all-time low, that be reversed. Within religious freedom circles, advocates and activists alike have decried these realities. But outside the Beltway, few even know the position of religious freedom ambassador exists, much less care who fills it. As such, there has been little political price to pay for leaders of either party, the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, who have failed to champion America's first freedom in some of the world's darkest corners. In fact, as a Republican, I'm embarrassed that for 2 consecutive Congresses, some members of my own party voted against passage of a bipartisan legislation I introduced to create a special envoy post in the State Department dedicated to advocating for religious minorities in the Middle East and strategic countries in South Central Asia like Pakistan and Afghanistan. There is a Christian woman, Asia Bibi, who has been in prison for 6 years. 6 years in Pakistan for blasphemy. For blasphemy. And yet we can't. And the person who helped us to get bin Laden is in prison, and there's almost silence and no one speaks out. And all the way after more than 3 years, the bill landed on the President's desk in July and was signed. But this post too, in the face of an undeniable deterioration of religious freedom in these parts of the world, the State Department's own admission that in 2013 members of minority religious communities were disproportionately affected by violence, discrimination, and harassment remains vacant. And unfortunately, 2 Republican senators tied this bill up for months and months and months before finally Roy Blatt got it out. Is it any wonder that most of the political leadership of this nation pays mere lip service to religious freedom? If the faith leaders and the lay people of the land are satisfied with the status quo. In September 27th, Daily Beast Peace, columnist Kirsten Powers wrote, quote, "Christians in the Middle East and Africa are being slaughtered, tortured, raped, kidnapped, beheaded, and forced to flee the birthplace of Christianity, She continued, quote, "One would think the horror might be consuming the pulpits and the pews of American churches. Not so. The silence has been nearly deafening." There's the word again, silence. The silence has been deafening. Given the severity of the challenges facing Christians and other religious minorities around the world, specifically in the Middle East, it is increasingly implausible to assert that people in the West are unaware of these human rights abuses. Do these issues receive the attention they ought to in mainstream media? No. But more and more these stories are breaking through the news cycles, if not always above the fold. Which begs the question, if awareness of the problem is no longer a palpable explanation, why do we not, as Powers remarks, see pulpits and pews consumed by these issues, consumed by what is taking place around the world? Robbie George has speculated that perhaps American and other Western Christians in particular are afraid of being accused of self-pleading if they demand justice on behalf of their co-religionists. They're concerned with how the cultural elite, the so-called beautiful people, many of whom are antagonistic toward Christianity, and for that matter, most commonly held social teachers of the world's major religions, concerned about how they'll be perceived. Perhaps a greater consequence, they have on some level bought into what Robbie describes as a key premise of liberal secularism, namely that religion in general, and Christianity in particular, is inherently oppressive. He describes this belief as figuring in the narrative that is central to the polemic against Christian faith. The essence of the narrative is that Christians are always the oppressors, never the oppressed. Always the persecutors, never the persecuted. Given time limitations, I will not delve into the manifold way in which the narrative is untrue, except to mention what any student of history knows to be true, namely that it was the Christians whose pursuit of justice animated the movements against slavery in the 18th century and for civil rights in the 20th century. And it has been men and women of faith confronted with the plight of the prisoner and burdened by the struggles of the poor who still today seek the dignity of every man and woman and child. People of faith feed the poor. You go to the food banks and the hunger banks, it's mainly people of faith who are feeding the poor. It's people of faith who are taking care of the sick. Who's working against prison rape? Chuck Colson and groups like that, faith-based groups. The secular groups didn't take on the issue of prison rape. They denied that prison rape was taking place. It was the faith-based community that stood up and said, we will deal with prison rape. Senator Kennedy, Senator Sessions, Bobby Scott, and a group of us there. But it was the faith-based community that brought that issue. Who's working for prison reform? It's the faith-based groups that are working for prison reform. And of all amazing things, and not to get sidetracked, Ebola! Who is fighting Ebola? Dr. Brantley with Samaritan's Purse, a faith-based group, and his nurse. They were fighting Ebola when CDC was absent, when the administration was absent, when every major government was absent, when the World Health Organization was absent. It was a Christian